The alkali dust was the first thing to greet her. It was not a welcome. It was a fine, white powder that coated the inside of the stagecoach, settling on the cracked leather seats and filming the small, hopeful window of Eleanor Taft's new life. She had been riding for 6 days from Omaha, pressed between a silent man who smelled of whiskey and a fussy woman holding a caged chicken. But for the past 2 days, she had been alone, rocking in the coach's stifling heat, practicing the name she would soon claim, Mrs. Asa Stewart. It felt foreign, a heavy coin on her tongue. The town, when it finally appeared, seemed less built and more surrendered. It was not a town. It was a scar. A dozen false front buildings, their paint peeling back to raw pine, lined a single, rutted street. The wind, which had been a constant, whining companion, seemed to die here, leaving the heat to press down like a physical weight. The year was 1882, and Wyoming was in the 3rd month of a drought that had baked the very memory of green from the land. The coach groaned to a halt in front of a building marked Hotel Provisions. The driver, a weary man with tobacco stains in his beard, climbed down and pulled her small trunk from the boot without a word. Eleanor stepped out, her legs trembling. Her navy blue traveling suit, meant to be respectable, was stiff with dust and sweat. She adjusted her hat, pulling the thin veil down, and looked for the face she knew only from a tintype photograph. A kind face. He had seemed Asa Stewart, a small rancher. His letters honest and his proposal simple. I have land. I need a wife. I hope you are of strong character. No one was waiting. The driver kicked the dust from his boots. That'll be the end of the line. Miss, I am meeting someone, Eleanor said, her voice sounding thin and eastern. Mr. Asa Stewart. Do you know where his ranch is? The driver paused, his hand on the coach door. He looked at the saloon, then at the hotel, then back at her. He spat a brown stream into the dust. You best ask inside. He hauled the mailbag over his shoulder and disappeared into the hotel. Eleanor was left alone on the boardwalk, a solitary, hopeful figure in a hopeless place. A man emerged from the hotel, wiping his hands on a dirty apron. He was the provisioner. He squinted at her. You the one for Stewart? Relief washed through her, so strong it made her dizzy. Yes, I am Eleanor Taft. He is expecting me. The man's face did not soften. He looked at her trunk, then at her belly, though she was not yet showing enough for a stranger to be certain. Well, you missed him. Is he delayed? With the ranch work? The man sighed, annoyed by the task that had fallen to him. He's dead. Miss, been in the ground 4 days. A riderless horse and a busted head. Buried him proper, far as the county's concerned. The world tilted. The dust, the heat, the smell of the livery stable down the street. It all pressed in. Dead? That's what I said. He was already turning away. Stage don't go back east for 2 days. Room's $2. Meals extra. But the wedding... The words were a whisper. She had sold her sister's locket in Cheyenne to pay for the bath and the meal that were supposed to precede her wedding day. No wedding, the man said. Going back inside, the door slammed, rattling the glass. For an hour, Eleanor did not move. She just stood by her trunk as the sun beat on her veiled hat. The town watched her. A woman in a calico dress peered from the seamstress shop, then pulled her shade. 2 cowboys lounging outside the saloon murmured, their laughter low and cruel. She was a curiosity. And then, quickly, a problem. She had to find the law. There was always the law. She found the sheriff, Amos Brody, not in his office, but tilted back in a chair on the saloon's porch, carving a piece of softwood into a rough-looking bird. He was a large man, gone soft in the middle, his badge a dull spot on a stained vest. Eleanor approached, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Sheriff, my name is Eleanor Taft. I was supposed to marry Mr. Asa Stewart. Sad business, Brody said, not looking up. The knife flicked, and a curl of wood fell to the floor. They said he had an accident, but his letters, He warned me. He said men were trying to push him off his land. Lots of men trying to push lots of other men. Miss, this is Wyoming. Nothing to be done. He signed a contract he shouldn't have. Most likely, drank too much, rode too fast. The land claims itself in the end. But I am here, his fiancée. Surely I have some claim to his property? This made the sheriff stop carving. He slowly lowered the chair to its legs and looked at her. His eyes were flat, like two worn coins. You got a marriage certificate, miss? No, we were to be married tomorrow. Then you got no claim. You got no husband. And you got no property. What you got is a ticket back east. I suggest this town ain't a charity. But who did this? She pleaded. The wind, he said, turning his attention back to the wood. The rocks, gravity. Take your pick. The case is closed. Tears of rage and fear burned at the back of her throat. She would not cry. Not here. She turned, her shoulders stiff, and walked away from him. She saw the church spire, a thin needle pointing to a brassy, unforgiving sky. Reverend Gideon was outside, polishing the small brass bell by the door. He was a thin man, and the only one in town wearing a clean, black coat. He offered a strained smile, until she spoke. Reverend, thank God, I am Eleanor Taft. Ah, yes, Miss Taft. He stopped polishing and folded his hands. He knew her name. He knew. You knew. Mr. Stewart had mentioned you. A tragedy. A terrible, terrible tragedy. We held a small service. But Sheriff Brody, he will not help me. Mr. Stewart's letters spoke of a syndicate. He said they were using forged contracts, threatening ranchers. He was murdered. Reverend, I know he was. The preacher's smile vanished. He took a small step back, as if she carried a sickness. Miss Taft, those are grievous accusations. Mr. Stewart was known to be agitated. He owed money. The drought is hard on all men. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must prepare for Sunday. I will pray for your safe journey home. I have no home, she whispered. Reverend, please, I have nowhere to go. Could I stay in the church? Just until I can think. He looked at her, truly looked, and his gaze was colder than the sheriff's. The house of God is not a flophouse. Madam, we do not shelter complications. Good day. He turned and went inside, the lock clicking shut with sharp finality. She was an outcast. In the space of an hour, she had gone from bride to nuisance to beggar. She walked to the end of the street, her trunk still sitting abandoned by the hotel. She leaned against the horse trough, the wood rough against her back, and watched the dust devils dance in the distance. A shadow fell over her. She looked up. He was tall, and the first thing she noticed was the limp. He favored his left leg, a stiffness that spoke of an old, badly healed break. He wore faded denims, a flannel shirt worn thin at the elbows, and a hat pulled low. His face was all angles, browned and cracked by the sun. His eyes a pale, piercing blue that seemed to hold the same emptiness as the sky. His hands, resting on the trough rail, were scarred and burnt. The knuckles split. He said one word, his voice a low rasp. Leave. Eleanor straightened up, insulted by the command. I beg your pardon. The coach, he said, nodding toward the stage. It turns around at sunup. Be on it. I will not. Who are you to tell me? Don't matter who I am. He looked down the street. At the sheriff's office. At the church. You spoke to Brody. You spoke to Gideon. They turned you out. It was not a question. They are afraid. Or corrupt. I will not be run off. The man gave a short, bitter laugh. Run off? Miss, you ain't even landed. You're floating, and this place will swallow you whole before morning. Asa Stewart was a fool. He thought a piece of paper from the government meant something. It don't. All that matters is the brand, and his brand is cold. I am not leaving, she said, the words catching in her throat. I cannot. He finally turned his full attention to her. His gaze was heavy, assessing. He was seeing the desperation she had tried to hide. Why? Silas Kane asked. You got family back east? No, no family. I sold everything I had to buy my passage, to buy my dress. Then you're a fool, too. The cruelty of it broke her. The tears she had held back finally came, hot and silent. I am not a fool, she whispered, her hands moving, unconsciously, to rest just below her waist. I am with child. The man's expression did not change. He did not recoil in shock or offer a word of pity. He just watched her, his pale eyes unblinking. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind. He seemed to be weighing 1,000 pounds of bad choices. His? Silas finally asked. Yes. She lied. It was a lie she had practiced for months. A lie born of a mistake in Boston. A lie that had pushed her to answer Asa Stewart's advertisement. The child was her shame, and her only hope. Silas looked away, toward the barren hills that rimmed the town. He rubbed the back of his sunburnt neck. Gideon won't help you. Brody won't. And I can't. But you can't stay on the street. He nodded toward his own ranch, visible a mile out of town, a small cabin and a barn, looking just as tired as the town. My land. You can wait there. For tonight. But you leave in the morning. Understand? She understood nothing, except that this grim, wounded man was the first person to offer her shelter instead of scorn. She nodded, unable to speak. My name is Silas Kane. I'll fetch your trunk. That night, Silas did not sleep. He gave Eleanor the cabin, a single room with a rope bed, a cold stove, and a floor he had swept clean. He took a bedroll to the barn, but the hay smelled of dust and failure. He heard the riders before he saw them. Around midnight, he moved to the crack in the barn door. 3 men. They rode not to his gate, but to the one next door, Asa Stewart's place, the Double S Ranch. They dismounted. One man, a thick-shouldered brute named Tully, pulled a running iron from his saddle boot. Another man struck a match, feeding a small fire until it grew. They heated the iron. Silas watched, his stomach twisting. He knew what this was. They dragged the iron from the flames, glowing orange in the dark. They pressed it to the pine gatepost, right over the Double S brand that Asa Stewart had carved there. The wood hissed and smoked. They held it, burning deep, obliterating the mark, scouring the wood clean. They were wiping him away, erasing the claim, preparing it for a new owner. Silas knew the process. He had seen it twice before. First, the threats, then the accident, then the erasure. The final step would be the auction. The syndicate, run by a smooth-talking man from Cheyenne named Harris, would buy the land for pennies, claiming it was forfeit for debts, all under the polite gaze of Sheriff Brody. He looked back toward his own cabin, where a small sliver of yellow light, Eleanor's candle, still burned. They had erased Stewart. She, his supposed fiancée, was a loose end, and she was on Silas's land. They would come for her, and then they would come for him. He had one thing left to sell. 2 days later, Maeve Langley rode into town. She rode hard, leading a second horse, and on that horse sat a man, his hands tied to the saddle horn, his face bruised. Maeve was not like Eleanor. She wore denim trousers, scuffed boots, and a linen shirt dark with sweat. A gun belt sat low on her hips. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical, messy knot. She was all angles and purpose, her eyes scanning the street with a predator's calm. She worked for the U.S. Marshals, not as a badge, but as a hunter. She went where they pointed, and she brought back what they paid for. She pulled the fugitive to a halt in front of Brody's office, dismounted, and stalked inside. The thud of her boots on the boardwalk was loud in the midday quiet. Silas was across the street, loading a wagon with sacks of feed. He was working for the provisioner, trying to earn enough coin for coffee. He heard the commotion and looked up. He saw her through the window of the sheriff's office. She was jabbing a finger at Brody, throwing a wad of papers on his desk. Silas froze. The 50-pound sack of oats felt suddenly weightless. Maeve. It had been 5 years. 5 years since the dust storm in Kansas. 5 years since the fight. 5 years since she'd looked at him with that same burning rage and said, "You're a coward, Silas. You'll always be a coward." She had left him there and ridden south to join the marshals. He had ridden north to Wyoming to try and build something she might, one day, be proud of. He had built this ranch, and now he was about to lose it. Maeve stormed back out of the office, leaving Brody to deal with her prisoner. She walked to the hotel, and that is when she saw him. Their eyes met across the 30 yards of dusty street. The world stopped. For Maeve, the sight of him was a physical blow. This was not the boy she had loved, the one who could laugh and fight and quote poetry he'd read in a dime novel. This was a husk. He was thinner, beaten down. He limped, the fire in his eyes. The thing she had loved most was gone. It was replaced by a dull, quiet defeat that shackled him more securely than any iron. Silas looked at her, his face a mask of old pain. He saw the badge on her belt. He saw the confidence. She had become what she'd always sworn she would, and he had become what she'd always feared he was. He broke eye contact first. He turned, hoisted the sack of feed, and threw it onto the wagon, his back to her. The rejection was as clear as a slap. Maeve stood there, her heart hammering. She was haunted. The fugitive, the bounty, the drought. It all faded. All she could see was the ghost of the man she knew, and the broken stranger he had become. The auction was the next day. It was not an event. It was a ritual of humiliation. It was held in the street, in front of the saloon. The auctioneer, a syndicate man in a clean suit, stood on a wagon bed. The town was gathered, their faces sullen. They were not here to bid. They were here to bear witness, to be reminded of who held the power. Eleanor stood at the back of the crowd. Silas had told her to stay in the cabin, but she had refused. She had to see. She had to understand what was happening to Asa's land. Maeve was there, too. She stood apart, leaning against a support post, her arms crossed. She knew what this was. A land grab, dressed up as law. "First parcel," the auctioneer shouted, his voice oily. "The delinquent claim of Asa Stewart, 600 acres, a cabin, and a creek bed, dry as it is. What am I bid for the deed?" Silence. "Do I hear $50? A man at the front, Mr. Harris, the syndicate boss, raised a manicured finger. $50 from Mr. Harris. Do I hear 60? The crowd was dead. They stared at their boots. "Sold!" The auctioneer banged a small hammer. "To Mr. Harris, for $50. Eleanor let out a small, strangled cry. 600 acres. A man's entire life. For $50. She felt sick. "Next!" the auctioneer boomed, checking his ledger. "A special lot, a matter of contract and servitude. We have before us the claim, brand, and name of Silas Kane." Eleanor's head snapped up. Maeve pushed off the post, her hand dropping to her gun belt. This was not a land grab. This was something else, something worse. Silas Kane walked through the crowd. His limp seemed more pronounced. He did not look at Maeve. He did not look at Eleanor. He walked to the wagon bed and stood beside the auctioneer, facing the town that had ignored him for 3 years. "As you know," the auctioneer smiled, "the syndicate is a benevolent organization. We believe in order. Mr. Kane has come to us with a request. He wishes to secure protection for a ward. A Miss Eleanor Taft, who finds herself without family in our town." He put a paternalistic hand on Silas's shoulder. Silas did not flinch. He just stared at the horizon. "In exchange for this protection," the auctioneer continued, "and for the clearing of his debts, Mr. Kane offers the last thing of value he possesses. He offers his name. He signs away his deed, his brand, the broken K, and his legal identity. He will remain on the land as a hired man in service to the new owner, Mr. Harris." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "No," she whispered. "Silas, no." Maeve understood. It was an old, cruel practice, servitude. He was making himself a slave to protect this woman, this pale, weak woman from the East. "Silas!" Maeve's voice cut through the air. It was sharp, a command. Silas turned his head. He looked at her. His eyes were empty. It was the look of a man who had already died. He turned back to the auctioneer. "We have the papers," the auctioneer said, holding up a ledger. "A signature is all that's required." Silas took the pen. He bent over the ledger. Eleanor watched, horrified, as he signed the paper that wiped him from existence. He was no longer Silas Kane, landowner. He was just Silas, a hired hand, property. He stepped down from the wagon. Tully, the syndicate man who had burned Ace's brand, stepped forward and held out his hand. Silas, his face grim, unbuckled his gun belt and handed it over. He was disarmed. He was broken. Harris smiled. "See to the horses, Silas. You'll be living in the barn. The cabin is for the lady." Silas nodded once, turned his back on the crowd, and limped toward the livery. Eleanor was frozen. He had done this for her. He had sacrificed the last piece of himself, his name, for a woman he did not know, for a lie she had told. Maeve stalked over to her. Her eyes were black with a rage so deep it was almost calm. "You," Maeve hissed, grabbing Eleanor's arm. Her grip was like iron. "You let him do that. I didn't know." "You have to leave. Now. Get on that stagecoach. If you stay, you've killed him. You understand me? What he just did. It's not a sacrifice. It's a signature on his own death warrant. They will work him until he breaks, and then they will bury him in an unmarked grave. He did it for you. You have to run." Eleanor looked at Maeve. This terrifying, beautiful woman. And then she looked at Silas's back as he disappeared into the stable. He had done it for her. "No," Eleanor said, pulling her arm free. The word was quiet, but it was solid. "I will not run. If I run, it meant nothing. I'm staying." Maeve stared at her, incredulous. She saw the foolishness, the Eastern softness, but beneath it, she saw a spine of iron she hadn't expected. Eleanor was clinging to the sacrifice. "Then you're a bigger fool than he is," Maeve spat. She turned, strode to her horse, and swung into the saddle. She had a bounty to deliver to the federal courthouse in Cheyenne, and she was already late. She rode out of that dead-end town, the dust rising behind her. She did not look back. She rode for a mile, the rage building in her chest. A hot, familiar poison. It was rage at the syndicate, rage at the town, rage at that pale, pregnant woman. But most of all, it was rage at Silas. Rage that he would let them do this, that he would choose this quiet, humiliating death over a fight, that he would prove her right. "You're a coward. Silas," she spurred her horse, racing the wind. "If he wants to die so bad," she swore aloud, her voice ripped away by the plains, "I'll kill him before they do." The land did not feel like his, because it was not, but it did not feel like hers either. Eleanor tried to build a life from the ashes of two others, the one she had invented for Asa Stewart, and the one Silas Kane had just thrown away. The cabin was hers, a strange, silent dowry paid in shame. Silas, by order of Mr. Harris, now slept in the barn. It was not a marriage. It was a shared prison. She scrubbed the pine floor, using the harsh lye soap from the provision store, as if she could scrub away the presence of the men who now owned them. She unpacked her trunk, setting out the few things she owned: a silver-backed brush, a copy of Pilgrim's Progress, and a small, porcelain doll that had been her mother's. The doll's staring blue eyes seemed to judge her from the mantel. Silas was gone before she woke and returned long after dark. He moved with the grim, mechanical rhythm of a man who has surrendered his will. He was no longer a rancher. He was livestock. She would leave a plate of food on the stove for him, cornbread and beans. Mostly, in the morning, the plate would be on the porch, wiped clean. He would not come inside while she was awake. He would not speak to her unless spoken to, and even then, his answers were clipped, short. Yes, no, rain's coming. He took the brunt of the syndicate's new management. Harris, the boss, had installed Tully, the man who had burned Ace's brand, as foreman. Tully was a man who enjoyed his work, especially the work of breaking a man who had once been his own master. One evening, Eleanor was outside, hanging her washing on a line Silas had strung. When Tully and 2 other riders returned, Silas was with them, his face caked in dust and sweat, his limp more pronounced. "Kane!" Tully bellowed. Not dismounting. "That fence line by the creek, it's down. You fix it, now!" Silas just nodded, his face blank, and turned toward the tool shed. "And you," Tully said, his eyes landing on Eleanor. He smiled, a slow, unpleasant spreading of his lips. He was enjoying her presence. Another spoil of war. "You make sure you keep the new owner's property clean. He likes things tidy." Eleanor flinched but held her ground, her hands twisting in her damp apron. She watched Silas grab a post-hole digger and walk, exhausted, toward the creek bed. It was nearly dark. He came back hours later. She was pretending to be asleep in the rope bed. She heard the barn door creak. She rose, pulling her shawl tight, and looked out the window. By the light of the waning moon, she saw him collapse onto the hay pile, not even bothering with his bedroll. He did not take off his boots. The beatings were not overt. Not at first. They were casual cruelties. A shove from Tully that sent Silas stumbling. A training session where he was forced to hold a restless stallion while the other men laughed. But one night, she heard a commotion from the barn, raised voices, a flat, heavy thud, and then another. She ran to the door, her heart in her throat. "Think you're better than us, Kane?" Tully's voice, slurred with whiskey. "You're just meat. You're Harris's meat." "And I'm the butcher." Another thud. Eleanor wanted to scream, to run out, to beg them to stop, but she was frozen. She was the protection he had bought. If she interfered, she would void the contract. She would make his sacrifice worthless. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth, tasting the salt of her own tears. He limped worse the next day. A dark, plum-colored bruise covered his left cheekbone. He kept his head down, refusing to meet her gaze, as if the shame of the beating was his, not theirs. Then they forced him to ride on the claims. "You're the face of compliance, Silas." "Mister," Harris had explained, visiting the ranch in his clean Cheyenne suit. He spoke to Silas as one would a favored dog. "These small-time ranchers, they're stubborn. But when they see you, a fellow rancher, signing on with us, working with us, it persuades them. It shows them the future." Eleanor watched them ride out. Silas mounted on his own horse, a horse that now belonged to Harris. They rode toward the South Range, toward the small homestead of a German family, the Schmidts. They returned 2 days later. Silas looked hollowed out, his pale eyes sunk deep. He went straight to the barn. Later that week, in town for flour, Eleanor saw Mrs. Schmidt. The woman was loading a small, rickety wagon, her children crying. Her husband stood by, his face a mask of defeat. The for sale sign on their gate was already being painted over with the syndicate's brand. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She understood. Silas was not just a servant. He was a tool. They were using his name, the name he had signed away, to justify their theft. He was the ghost they paraded before the living, to frighten them into their graves. 50 miles east, Maeve Langley was lying flat on a ridge, her spyglass trained on a lone rider. The man was Luther Dobbs, a card cheat and sometime backshooter with a $500 bounty on his head. He was her ticket back to respectability with the marshal's office, after she'd left her last prisoner with Brody and ridden off in a cloud of fury. The plains were vast, baked brown. The heat shimmered, making the air dance. She had been trailing Dobbs for 3 days, living on jerky and alkali water. He was smart, but she was patient. He was heading for a box canyon, a dead end. She had him. She circled wide, her horse moving silently over the brittle grass, and came up behind the canyon's entrance. She waited. An hour later, Dobbs rode in, dismounted, and started to build a small, smokeless fire. Maeve drew her revolver and stepped out from the rocks. "Federal Marshal, Dobbs, don't even think about it." Dobbs froze, his hands in the air. He was a weasel of a man, with a thin mustache and darting eyes. "Well now, miss," he said, trying to smile. "No need for all that. I was just admiring the view. Turn around, hands behind your back." She was walking toward him, the rope from her saddle in her hand, when he said, "Mister, Harris ain't gonna like this. He ain't gonna like you taking one of his men." Maeve stopped. The name hit her like a physical jolt. "Harris? From Cheyenne? You know him?" Dobbs's fear was fading, replaced by a slippery confidence. "I'm on his payroll, just running an errand. This is all a mistake. You let me go, and I can make sure you get a piece. Too, he's a generous man. He's taken over this whole territory, got the law, got the land, got everything." Maeve stared at him. The dots connected, fast and sharp. The syndicate, the auctions, Silas. This man was part of it. The web was bigger than that one-horse town. It stretched all the way out here. Her first instinct was to shoot him, to put a bullet in his lying mouth for even knowing Silas's new master. But a cold, calculating anger took its place. This weasel wasn't a bounty. He was a thread. "Turn around. Dobbs," she said again, her voice flat. He turned, expecting the rope. Instead, he heard the click of her gun's hammer. "Wait," he stammered. "I told you, I work for Harris." "I know," Maeve said. "Get on your horse. You're letting me go." "I'm following you back," she said. "And if you so much as look over your shoulder, I'll drop you. Now ride." He scrambled onto his horse and rode out of the canyon. Maeve followed, 50 yards back, a patient hunter who had just found a much bigger trail. This was not about Silas's cowardice anymore. This was about a rot that went deep, and she was going to be the one to cut it out. Back on the ranch, the silence between Silas and Eleanor had become a living thing, a third person in the cabin. That night, she was waiting for him on the porch when he came back from the fence line. His hands were raw, bleeding from handling the barbed wire. She held out a bowl of water and a clean rag. "Let me—" He stopped, hesitating. He looked at the water, then at her. He finally sat on the bottom step of the porch, his back to her. She knelt and began to clean the cuts, her touch gentle. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He did not move, did not answer. He just stared at the barn, his new home. "Why did you do it?" she pressed, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "You did not know me. You did not know. You did not know the truth." "What truth?" he asked, his voice rough. "The child," she said, the admission tearing out of her. "It is not Asa Stewart's. It was a mistake. Back home, I lied. I lied to him, and I lied to you. I am not a widow. I am just ruined. And you gave up your name for a lie." She waited for him to turn, to rage at her, to call her the names the preacher would soon use. Silas did not turn. He sat for a long moment. Then he said, "It don't matter. The lie, the child, none of it. It wasn't for you." "Then why?" "Because they were going to do it anyway," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in. "Harris wanted the land. He had the paper. My name was already on it. Forged or not, they would have taken it. They would have run you off. Or worse. This was the only way I had left to choose. I chose to make it mean something, to protect something, even if it was a lie." Eleanor felt the sting of tears. He had not saved her. He had just used her as a witness to his own. Final act of defiance. "Then run," she begged, grabbing his arm. "Silas, please. We can leave. Tonight. We can go east or west. Anywhere. This isn't protection. This is a slow death. Let me help you. You do not owe me this." He turned then, and his face, in the twilight, was ancient. He looked at her, his pale eyes full of a sorrow she could not understand. He saw her earnestness, her fear, her own desperate need to be saved. He lifted his hand, the one she had just cleaned, and gently took hers. He looked at her palm, at the calluses she was just beginning to earn. He raised her hand to his lips, and pressed a kiss to the back of her knuckles. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of goodbye. "There ain't no place to run to, Eleanor," he said. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked to the barn without looking back. Sunday came, a bright, hot, merciless day. Mr. Harris had decreed that the town should celebrate its prosperity. Reverend Gideon, his face beaming with a newfound sense of civic duty, had agreed to hold a small service in the street to bless the very auction block where Silas had been sold. Eleanor, starved for any kind of grace, had put on her one good dress, the navy traveling suit, and walked to town. She stood at the back of the small crowd. Reverend Gideon spoke of community, of hard work, of the benevolence of men like Mr. Harris, who were bringing order to the frontier. He held up the communion cup. "Let all who are in fellowship with Christ draw near," he intoned. Eleanor, her heart aching, moved forward. She needed this. She needed to be part of something, to be seen by God, if not by man. She was the last in the small line. She knelt on the dusty ground. She closed her eyes and held out her hands. Nothing. She opened her eyes. Reverend Gideon was looking down at her, his face a mask of cold righteousness. He recognized her. "No," he said, his voice carrying to the entire crowd. Eleanor stared, confused. "Reverend? The cup of the Lord is not for the lips of a harlot," he said, his voice rising. "We do not serve the wages of sin. This woman, who lived under the roof of one man while promised to another, who brought ruin and death to a good, if foolish, rancher, who now shares a cabin with the man who shamed himself for her, she is a sickness here." The townspeople stared. Some women gasped. Others nodded, their faces hard. Sheriff Brody, standing near the saloon, just looked away, suddenly fascinated by his own boots. Eleanor felt as if he had struck her. The blood drained from her face. She rose, stumbling backward, her hands still cupped as if holding the grace she had been denied. "Go from here, madam," the preacher commanded. "Go and repent your wickedness." She turned and fled. She did not walk, she ran. She ran down the long, dusty street, the sound of the crowd's murmurs, their quiet, satisfied judgments, following her all the way back to the ranch. That night, the sky broke. The drought had not ended, but a fierce, dry thunderstorm tore across the plains. Lightning split the sky, and thunder cracked like artillery. The wind howled, rattling the cabin's single window. Eleanor sat on the rope bed, her mother's doll clutched in her lap. She was shaking. The preacher's words echoed in her head. Harlot, sickness, wickedness. The rain began to fall, a hard, driving torrent that turned the dust to instant mud. And she thought of Silas, beaten, shamed, and now, sleeping in a drafty barn in this storm. He had kissed her hand. He had stayed when he could have run. He had, in his own broken way, tried to protect her lie. She could not bear it. Grabbing a thick wool blanket from her trunk, she threw open the cabin door and ran through the deluge. The mud sucked at her shoes. She was soaked in seconds. She burst into the barn. It was dark, smelling of hay and animals and Silas's sweat. "Silas?" A flash of lightning illuminated the space. He was not in the hay pile. He was standing by the large barn doors, looking out at the rain, his shirt plastered to his back. He turned, startled, as she ran in. "Eleanor, you should be in the cabin. And you should be in here. Dry?" she cried, her voice cracking. After what they did, after what he said, that preacher, that man." She was weeping now, deep, shuddering sobs of humiliation and rage and a profound, aching loneliness. Silas just watched her. He saw her, truly saw her for the first time. Not as a burden, not as a symbol, just as a woman, as broken as he was. He walked over to her. He did not speak. He took the blanket from her trembling hands and unfolded it. He wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling her in from the storm. She collapsed against his chest, her hands grabbing his shirt. "He called me a harlot," she wept into his flannel. "I know," Silas said, his hand resting on her wet hair. Don't listen. He's a bought man. His words are as cheap as Harris's money." They stood like that for a long time, the storm raging around them. She was cold, shivering violently. "You'll catch your death," he said, his voice rough. He led her to the dry hay in the loft, pushing aside his bedroll. He sat her down, tucking the blanket around her. He sat beside her, not touching, just sharing the small, dry space. They were two people starving for tenderness, rejected by the world, left with only each other. She looked at him. The bruise on his face was dark in the shadows. His eyes were no longer empty. They were full of the same storm that raged outside. She leaned in and, before he could react, she kissed him. It was a clumsy, desperate kiss. It tasted of salt and dust and rain. He was stiff for a moment, surprised, and then he kissed her back. It was not passion. It was not love. It was a raw, primal need to feel something other than pain. It was a joining of their shared misery, a desperate grasp for warmth in a world that had offered them nothing but cold. He laid her back in the hay, and, for the first time, in the heart of the storm, they were not alone. Maeve rode back into town 3 days later, her face grim. She had left Dobbs with a federal marshal in a neighboring county, along with her report on Harris. But she knew it was not enough. She had to face Silas. She found him in the barn, as she knew she would. He was shoeing a horse, the animal's hoof locked between his knees, his back bent to the work. Eleanor was in the cabin, kneading dough for bread. The door was open to catch the breeze. She saw Maeve ride up, dismount, and stride toward the barn with a purpose that made Eleanor's stomach clench. She dried her hands on her apron and moved to the doorway, shielded by the shadows, watching. "You're a fool, Silas," Maeve said, no greeting, just the raw, cold anger. Silas did not look up. He kept hammering the nail into the hoof. "You got your man. This isn't about my bounty. This is about you. You think this is noble?" Her voice was low, cutting. "Letting them beat you, letting them use your name to steal from old men and widows. This isn't a sacrifice. It's a slow suicide." "It's my choice," he said, his voice muffled. "It's cowardice." She spat. "You're a coward. You always were. You'd rather die on your knees, piece by piece, than stand up and fight them." Silas slammed the hoof down. The horse shied, startled. He stood up, slowly, every joint stiff. He turned to face her. His eyes, those pale, ice-blue eyes, were now burning. "Stand up." His voice was a rasp, raw with 5 years of unspent pain. "You taught me about standing up. Maeve, you taught me what it costs. What good is standing up when the world just cuts your legs out from under you? I taught you to survive." "No," he roared, and Eleanor jumped. "You taught me how to leave. You taught me how to run. You already killed me." Maeve flinched, as if he had hit her. "You killed me the day you left me in that Kansas dust," he whispered, the rage collapsing into a terrible, hollow grief. "You killed the man I was. This," he gestured to the barn, to himself, to the brand on the wall. "This is just waiting for the dirt to cover me." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. The air left her lungs. It was not about her. The sacrifice, the protection, it had never been about her. She was just a stray dog he had pitied, a convenient excuse. The real story was here, in this barn. The real story was this woman, this hunter, who held his past in her hands. She saw it all, in that one terrible moment, the shared history, the deep, unhealed wounds. She was not his savior. She was not even his burden. She was just a witness to a haunting, and she realized, with a cold, dawning clarity, that Silas was not the only one trapped. They all three were, caught in a snare of memory and pain, and the ropes were pulling tighter. The barn was silent. Maeve's accusation, "You already killed me," hung in the dusty air, heavier and more suffocating than the heat. For Silas, the smell of hay and manure dissolved. He was not in Wyoming in 1882. He was 19 years old, and he was in a muddy graveyard in Missouri, the air thick with the scent of wet clay and raw pine. The rain was not a storm. It was a cold, weeping drizzle that plastered his thin shirt to his back. The shovel was heavy. He, Maeve, and her father were the only ones there. The preacher had refused to come, calling the death a consequence of theft. Thomas, Maeve's younger brother, 14 years old. It had been Silas's idea, a stupid, arrogant boy's idea. A cattleman named Harris, new to the county, had legally seized a dozen head of cattle from Maeve's father, claiming a debt. Silas, full of fire and cheap novels, had vowed to get them back. We'll just reclaim them. Maeve, it's not stealing if they're already ours. He had not counted on the men Harris had hired. He had not counted on them carrying shotguns. Or on Thomas, who had tagged along, tripping over a wire in the dark. Silas had run. He had grabbed Maeve's hand and run, dragging her through the woods, the sound of the blast echoing behind them, the sound of Thomas's thin cry cut short. Now, he was filling the hole. Every scrape of the shovel on the wet earth was an accusation. Maeve had not cried, not one tear. She stood by the small, white pine cross, her face carved from stone. When the last shovelful of mud was patted down, her father, a broken, silent man, had walked back to the cabin. Silas dropped the shovel. "Maeve, She turned to him. Her eyes were not sad. They were dead. "You killed him. It was an accident. I did not know they had guns." "You knew," she said, her voice flat. "You knew they were dangerous, and you went anyway. You did it to be a hero, Silas, and you got my brother put in the ground." She had hit him then, a hard, closed fist blow to his chest. He took it. She hit him again. He took that, too, and then she collapsed against him. And it was she who kissed him. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of pure, shared agony. It was teeth and desperation and the taste of grave mud. It was a seal on a horrible secret. They fled west together 2 weeks later. Her father had hanged himself in the barn. There was nothing left but the bank-owned land and the 2 graves. They rode for 3 months, living on what Silas could hunt and what Maeve could steal. They were bound, not by love, but by the shared trauma. 2 halves of a single wound. They made it to Kansas, to a small, dusty outpost that looked like the end of the world. And that is where she left him. He woke up one morning, and she was gone. The horse she had bought was gone. She had left him his rifle and a note. "I cannot look at you. I'm going to find the law. I'm going to be the thing that stops men like Harris. Do not follow me." He had sat there, in that dying Kansas town, and understood. She had not been running with him. She had been running from him. He was the living reminder of her failure, and she of his. Her joining the Marshals was not a career choice. It was an act of penance and an act of vengeance. He had ridden north into Wyoming and tried to become a ghost, and now the ghost had found him. He came back to the present. The barn. Maeve was staring at him, her face a mask of old anger. Eleanor was a pale shape in the cabin doorway, her hand over her mouth. "Get out," Silas said to Maeve, his voice hoarse. "Get out of my barn." "This is not your barn," she retorted, the words sharp. "It is Harris's, just like you." She turned on her heel and strode out, mounting her horse in one fluid motion. She did not look at Eleanor. She just rode toward town, a rigid, angry line on a dusty horizon. Eleanor was left in the doorway, her blood thrumming. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, and the picture they formed was terrible. She felt like an intruder, a foolish child who had wandered into the middle of a war that had started a decade ago. For 2 days, a fragile, awful truce held the ranch. Silas worked. Eleanor cooked. Maeve did not return. Silas slept in the barn, his silence thicker than the cabin walls. Eleanor, who had felt a strange, desperate tenderness for him in the loft, now felt only a profound sense of trespass. She was a complication in a tragedy she could not even name. She was running out of flour, and the salt was low. Silas was gone, sent by Tully to ride the south perimeter, a meaningless, punishing task. Eleanor knew she had to go to town. The thought of facing the preacher, or the sheriff, or the smirking townsfolk made her stomach clench. But the child inside her was a constant, demanding presence. It needed to eat, even if its mother was a pariah. She hitched the one old mule to the buckboard. It was a slow, rattling, sun-baked ride. The town, when she arrived, seemed to hold its breath. The provisioner sold her the flour, taking her coin without meeting her eye. He did not offer to help carry the sack. She managed to heave it onto the buckboard and was tying it down when two men stepped off the saloon porch. It was Tully and another of Harris's men, a thin, rat-faced man named Jeb. "Well, looky here," Tully drawled, hitching his trousers. He was not drunk, but he carried the casual menace of a man who knew he was the law. "The little cabin keeper. Come to town all by yourself?" Eleanor ignored him, her fingers fumbling with the rope. "Mister, Harris likes his people to be polite." "Missy," Jeb said, stepping closer. He smelled of sweat and chewing tobacco. "You're living on his land, eating his food. Near enough. Least you can do is say hello." "I have my supplies," Eleanor said, keeping her voice steady, her eyes on the knot. "Please let me pass." "Oh, we'll let you pass," Tully said. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard. "But we just want to make sure you understand the arrangement. Silas, he signed everything over. The land, the cabin, even what is in it. And you, little bird, you are in it. You are syndicate property, just like him." Eleanor's head snapped up. "I am a free citizen. You will unhand me." "Citizen," Tully laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You are what we say you are, and I say you are a trespasser who needs to be taught her place." He started to drag her, his grip tightening. She cried out, a short, sharp sound of fear and pain. "Let her go." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the street. It was as cold and clean as a razor. Maeve Langley was standing 20 yards away, in the shadow of the sheriff's office. Her duster was pulled back, her hand resting on the grip of her revolver. Tully froze. He slowly turned his head. His smile was gone. "Langley, this is not your jurisdiction. This is a private matter between Mr. Harris and his tenant." "She told you to unhand her," Maeve said, taking a slow step forward. "I am advising you to listen." "Or what?" Jeb sneered, though he did not move from behind Tully. "You gonna shoot us, Marshal, right here in the street? For what? Talking to a—" He used the same word the preacher had. Maeve's gun was out of its holster before the word was finished. She did not point it at Jeb. She pointed it at the dirt. An inch from his boot, she fired. The explosion was deafening. Jeb yelped and scrambled backward, falling over his own feet into the dust. Tully, his face white with rage, let go of Eleanor's arm. His hand hovered over his own gun. "You're crazy," Tully hissed. "I'm clear," Maeve said, her gun now steady, aimed at his belt buckle. "She is a citizen. You will not touch her again. You will not speak to her again. You will back away, and you will get on your horse. This is not a request." The saloon doors swung open. Sheriff Brody stumbled out, his face pale and sweating. "Maeve, for God's sake," he shouted, his hands held up. "Put the gun down." "We do not need this trouble." "Then tell your man to stand down." "Brody," Maeve said, her eyes never leaving Tully. "Tully, just go," Brody pleaded. "She is not worth it. Harris would not want this. Not in public." Tully stared at Maeve, his eyes promising murder. He looked at the sheriff, who was practically trembling. He was outgunned, and he knew it. He gave Maeve a short, hateful nod. "This is not over, Marshal," he said. He helped Jeb to his feet, and the two men stalked back into the saloon. Brody turned on Maeve, his relief instantly replaced by a panicked anger. "Are you trying to get us all killed? Langley, what in hell do you think you're doing?" "My job," Maeve said, holstering her weapon. Your job is tracking fugitives. It is not interfering with the private business of this county. Harris runs this town. He owns this town. He keeps the peace." "This is not peace, Brody," Maeve said, walking toward him. "This is a rot, and you are letting it spread. You are a coward, and you are bought." You cannot speak to me that way," he sputtered. "I just did, now. I am escorting Miss Taft back to the ranch. If any of your peacekeepers follow us, I will consider it an act of aggression against a federal officer. Do you understand me?" Brody's mouth opened and closed. He was a man trapped, afraid of the syndicate, and terrified of the law Maeve represented. He said nothing. He just turned, his shoulders slumped, and went back into his office, closing the door. Eleanor was shaking, her arm burning where Tully had grabbed her. Maeve walked over, her face still hard. "Get on the buckboard," Maeve said. Thank you." "I did not do it for you," Maeve said, untying her own horse. "I did it for the badge. Now, let's go." Maeve rode beside the slow-moving buckboard all the way back to the ranch. The silence was heavy, but it was different. It was not the angry silence of rivals. It was the watchful, assessing silence of something else. That night, Silas was still gone. Maeve did not go into town. She built a small, neat fire near the porch, well away from the barn. She sat by it, cleaning her rifle, the pieces laid out on a cloth. Eleanor came out of the cabin, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. She had used the last of the beans. She offered one to Maeve. Maeve looked at the cup, then at Eleanor. She took it. "Thank you." Eleanor sat on the porch step, a safe distance from the fire. For a long time, the only sounds were the snap of the dry wood and the metallic click of Maeve cleaning her gun. "He is not coming back tonight," Eleanor said quietly. "No," Maeve agreed. "Harris is punishing him, making him sleep on the plains, for what happened in town. It was my fault." "No," Maeve said, her voice sharp. "It was not, it was theirs." She snapped the rifle's bolt back into place. "They are good at that. Making you feel like their boot on your neck is your own fault." Another silence. "Why are you here, Maeve?" Eleanor asked. The question she had been holding for days. "It is not just for him, and it is not just for the badge." Maeve stopped cleaning. She stared into the small fire. The flames cast hard shadows across her face. "I am here for Harris," Maeve said, her voice low. "I am here to see him hang." "Because of Silas?" "Because of my brother." And Maeve told her. She told her about Missouri, about her father, and about Thomas, about a man who came, backed by paid-off law, with forged papers claiming a debt, about how they had not just taken the cattle, they had taken the land. They stole his name," Maeve whispered, and Eleanor saw, for the first time, a crack in the armor, a glistening of moisture in the bounty hunter's eyes. After they killed him, they used his name, Thomas Langley. They forged his signature on contracts, using him to steal from our neighbors. He was dead, and they were still using him, making him a tool, just like they are doing to Silas. "Harris," Eleanor breathed. "It was Harris, all those years ago?" "I do not know for certain, but the smell is the same. The methods are the same. They erase you, they take your land, they take your name, and then they make you a ghost in your own life. They did it to Asa Stewart. They are doing it to Silas. And they did it to my family. I am here to bring justice for all of them." Eleanor looked at this woman, this hard, angry, dangerous woman. She saw the 16-year-old girl in the graveyard, hollowed out by grief. She saw a woman who had spent the last 5 years chasing a ghost, fueled by a rage so deep it had become her entire world. She was not a rival. She was not the woman who held Silas's past. She was a mirror. "You are just like him," Eleanor whispered. "You are both trapped. He is chained to this ranch, and you are chained to that grave." Maeve looked up, her eyes flashing. "I am not chained. I am the chain. I am the one who pulls them in." "Are you?" Eleanor said. standing? Or are you just pulling yourself, over and over, back to the same spot? You are full of wounds. Maeve, just like me, just like him. Only you have made yours a weapon. She left Maeve's cup on the porch rail and went back inside the cabin, leaving the bounty hunter alone with her ghosts by the fire. Silas returned the next day. He looked like a man who had been dragged, his face gray with exhaustion. He stumbled off his horse and headed for the water pump. Before he could reach it, Harris and Tully rode up. Harris, in his clean suit, looked bored. "Mrs. Hemlock," Harris said, as if discussing the weather. "The widow on the North Creek. She persists in her refusal. It is tiresome. It is time to make the point. Silas, you will ride with Tully. You will deliver the final warning, and you will ensure compliance." Tully, smiling, unstrapped a can of kerosene from his saddle and tossed it to the ground at Silas's feet. It landed with a dull thud. Silas stared at the can. "She has 2 sons," Silas said, his voice a dry croak. "They can sleep outside," Harris said, dismissive. "It is a fine night. Go, burn the barn, not the house. Unless she proves difficult, we must have standards." Eleanor and Maeve both watched from the porch. Maeve's hand was near her gun, but she was still. This was not her fight. Not yet. Silas looked at the kerosene. He looked at Harris's smiling, reasonable face. He looked at Tully, who was uncoiling a long, black bullwhip from his saddle horn, just in case. And Silas looked at the cabin. He saw Eleanor in the doorway, her face pale, her hand on her belly. He had signed his name. He had taken the beatings. He had paraded himself as a tool to frighten old men. He had done it all, sinking deeper and deeper into the shame. This was the bottom. They were asking him to become them. He shook his head, just once. "No." The word was quiet, but it echoed across the ranch yard. Harris's smile did not fade. It just tightened. "I beg your pardon." "No," Silas said again. Louder. He kicked the kerosene can. It rolled into the dust. "I will not," Harris sighed. "I had hoped this would not be necessary. You have been a disappointment. Silas, I thought you understood the contract." He nodded to his foreman. "Tully, remind Mr. Kane of his obligations." Tully grinned. "My pleasure, Mr. Harris." He dismounted, the whip in his hand. "To the fence post, Kane, or we'll take it out on the woman." Silas looked at Eleanor. He did not move. Tully backhanded him across the face, the force of it splitting his lip. "Move!" Silas, his face a mask of stone, walked to the fence post by the horse trough. He put his hands on it. He did not need to be tied. "You'll watch." Tully snarled at Eleanor. "This is what happens when property disobeys." Maeve stepped forward. "This is not—" "Stay out of it, Langley," Harris snapped, his voice suddenly hard. "This is a legal matter of contract. You interfere, and I will have your badge for impeding lawful business. Brody will sign the warrant himself." Maeve stopped, her face contorted in a mask of helpless fury. Tully raised the whip. He took his time. He was an artist. The whip cracked, faster than sound, and bit into Silas's back. Silas grunted, his whole body seizing. The flannel shirt tore open. Eleanor cried out, her hand flying to her mouth. She did not run. She did not hide. She stood in the doorway and watched. Tully brought the whip back. Crack! Silas's legs buckled, but he held himself up, his knuckles white on the post. Crack! A line of red bloomed bright against the blue flannel. Crack! Over and over. Tully was breathing hard, his face flushed with the effort, with the pleasure. Silas made no sound now. He just hung there, his body taking the punishment. His head bowed. Finally. Harris raised a hand. "That is sufficient. Tully, I believe the point is made." Tully, breathing heavily, spat in the dirt. He coiled his whip. "Next time, I'll take the skin off his bones." They mounted up and rode off, leaving Silas sagging against the post. Eleanor was moving before the dust settled. She ran into the cabin, grabbed a kitchen knife, and ran back out. Maeve was already there, holding Silas up as Eleanor cut the remnants of his shirt from his body. They half carried, half dragged him into the cabin. He did not go to the barn. He collapsed face down on Eleanor's rope bed, his body shaking. His back was a ruin. The black whip had laid the skin open in a dozen places, the blood welling up in thick, dark lines. Maeve stood in the doorway, watching, her jaw working. I should have shot him. And Harris would have had you hanged, Eleanor said, her voice trembling but cold. Go! Watch the road! He needs me. Maeve looked at Eleanor, seeing the steel that had been forged in the last few weeks. She nodded and went back outside. Rifle in hand, Eleanor got the basin. She got the clean rags. Her hands did not shake as she dipped the cloth in the cool water. She began to clean his wounds, her touch methodical, gentle. Silas was silent, his face buried in the pillow. He did not flinch from the sting of the water. He just lay there, his body a map of their cruelty. She finished, her hands stained with his blood. She sat on the floor by the bed, the bloody rags in the bowl. The cabin was utterly silent, save for the buzz of a fly against the window. Then, a sound, a small, choked, hitching sound. It came again. Silas was weeping. It was not the loud, desperate sobbing she had unleashed in the barn. It was the silent, agonizing, internal weeping of a man who had just witnessed his own execution. She put her hand on his shoulder, her fingers resting lightly on the one small patch of unbroken skin. He did not turn his head. His voice was thick, muffled by the pillow. He was right, Silas whispered. Who? The preacher. He called you, what he called you, but he was wrong. Silas, be quiet. You need... He was wrong, he insisted, his body shuddering. I am the one. I am the whore. I sold my name. I sold my back. His voice broke. It is not the pain, Eleanor, he choked out. It is the shame. I cannot be this. Eleanor felt her own tears, hot and fast, fall onto his skin. He was not weeping because of the pain. He was weeping because, for the first time in 5 years, he wanted to be a man, and he had just been reminded, in the most brutal way possible, that he was nothing but property. She did not try to comfort him. She just knelt there, her hand on his back, bearing witness to the slow, painful return of his soul. The wound is a mouth. It speaks in the silence of the night. Silas lay on the rope bed, his fever a dry, searing heat that seemed to radiate from his ruined back. He had not been moved to the barn. He would not have been able to make it. He was, for the first time, a prisoner in Eleanor's cabin, his body a map of his own defiance. Eleanor sat in the straight-back chair, her head slumped forward, asleep but not at rest. Her hands, still stained dark, lay in her lap. She had done what she could. She had cleaned the dozen weeping cuts, the blood and torn flannel stiffening the rags. She had no whiskey for the pain and no salve for the wounds. She had only cool water and her own silent presence. Outside, Maeve did not sit. She paced. She walked the perimeter of the small ranch, from the dark, silent barn to the horse trough, her boots grinding in the dust. Every step was a self-inflicted blow. She had stood there. She had watched. Her badge, the weight of the federal government, the very symbol of her life's purpose, had been rendered useless by a single word: contract. Harris, that snake in a clean suit, had checkmated her. He had used the law to block the law. She had watched Tully, a blunt, stupid instrument, nearly kill the one person left in the world who shared her oldest, deepest scar. She had heard Silas's shame, his confession of being broken, and she, who had called him a coward, had done nothing. Her anger, the hot, familiar rage that had been her fuel for 5 years, was gone. In its place was something cold, something far more dangerous. It was a clarity. Harris's power was not in his guns. It was not in Tully, or even in the bought and paid for Sheriff Brody. It was in the paper. It was in the signatures, the ledgers, the lawful business that allowed him to whip a man in broad daylight. She had tried to fight him with her gun. She had failed. Now, she would fight him with his own weapons. She stopped pacing and looked at the town. A few dead lights under a blanket of stars. She would not ride in as a marshal. She would go in as a ghost. Silas's fever broke 2 days later. He woke to the smell of thin coffee. He was weak, the pain in his back a dull, constant fire. He tried to sit up, but his muscles screamed and locked. "Be still," Eleanor's voice, quiet. He let his head fall back. He was on his stomach. He saw her, not by the bed, but by the window, staring out. He has not been back," Silas rasped, his throat dry. "No. Harris nor Tully. They have left us alone. They think they have won." "They have... No," she said, turning. Her face was pale, drawn, but the fear was gone, replaced by a weary resolve. "You said no to them. I have never heard anyone do that." He said nothing. He had said no, and the price was this. He closed his eyes. Maeve, meanwhile, was a shadow. She had left her horse at the ranch and walked into town after midnight, moving through the alleys, avoiding the moonlit street. She did not go to the hotel. She did not go to the saloon. She went to the small, clapboard house of the widow, Mrs. Hemlock. It took 10 minutes of soft, persistent knocking before a light appeared. The widow opened the door a crack, a shotgun in her hands. "Who is it?" "Maeve Langley, Federal." Maeve stopped herself. "I am a friend of Silas Kane's." The door opened wider. The woman was older, her face a web of deep lines. What happened to him? They rode out here, angry, 2 days ago. Said my complaint had caused trouble. He refused them," Maeve said, slipping inside. "He refused to burn your barn. They whipped him for it." The woman's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terrible, shared guilt. "Oh, God! Oh, my God! That good man!" "He is... Which is why I need your help," Maeve said. "I need to see the contract Harris made you sign, the one for your debt. It will do no good. It is legal. I signed it. He had my husband's marker. Please, I need to see the paper." The widow retrieved it. Maeve held it to the lamplight. It was simple, brutal. The widow's property, held as collateral against a debt, payable to the Wyoming Prosperity Syndicate, signed by Harris. And beneath it, a witness signature, Amos Brody, sheriff. Maeve then went to the Schmidts, the German family Eleanor had seen leaving town. They were not gone. They were living in a tent behind the church, existing on Gideon's scraps. Too broke to move, too broken to stay. It was the same story. A debt, a contract, Harris's name, Brody's witness. But there was another man. "Mr. Schmidt said, his voice thick. He came with them, a broken man, with a limp. He did not speak. They said he was the one who held the original marker. They said his name was Kane." Maeve's blood ran cold. "Silas. Silas Kane. He looked at me, his eyes, like a dead man's. He said nothing. Harris said, 'See, your neighbor agrees. It is all legal.' And so I signed." Maeve left them. She now had the shape of it. This was not just land theft. It was a conspiracy, with Silas at its center. She needed the county records. She went to the small courthouse, which also held the land office. The clerk, a small, nervous man named Miller, slept in a room in the back. Maeve did not knock. She picked the flimsy lock on his door and was standing over his bed before he was fully awake. He yelped, scrambling for his spectacles. "Who? What? Shut up, Miller," Maeve whispered, her voice like ice. She held up her badge, letting it glint in the moonlight. "You have been witnessing and filing fraudulent claims for Harris for 6 months. I do not know what you mean. I'm a county official." "You are a witness to conspiracy," Maeve said, leaning in. "Which means, when the federal judge gets here, and he is coming, you will be the first one he tries. Harris will be in Cheyenne, spending his money, and you will be on a gallows. Unless... You help me? Miller was shaking, his nightshirt soaked in sweat. What? What do you want? The ledger, the new claims. From the last 6 months. He led her to the front office, his hands trembling so badly he could barely work the key. He pulled out the thick, leather-bound book. Maeve opened it. She saw Asa Stewart's claim. Transferred to Harris. Sold at auction. Witness, Brody. She saw the Schmidt claim. Transferred. She saw the Hemlock claim. Transferred. And then she saw 3 others. A rancher named Joyce. A homesteader named Banks. A small plot by the river. Owner unknown. All transferred. All signed over to the syndicate. But the signature on the original forfeit documents was not Harris's. It was not Brody's. It was Silas Kane. Again, and again, and again. His name, his signature, scrawled, perfectly forged, on document after document, signing away properties he had never owned, transferring them to Harris, who would then lawfully auction them off. Maeve finally understood. It was her brother's story, told on a massive scale. Silas was not just a servant. He was not just a tool. He was the scapegoat. Harris had his real signature on the servitude contract from the auction. He had forged his signature on a dozen others. When the federal investigators finally came, when the whole rotten structure collapsed, all the proof of the fraud would point to one man, the man who had legally signed himself into servitude, the man who was paraded before the victims, the man who had no name, no rights, and no one to defend him. Harris would walk away clean. Silas Kane would hang. "Oh, Silas," she whispered, her hand tracing the forged signature. You damned fool." She returned to the ranch as the sun was rising. She felt sick. The next few days passed in a haze of unspoken tension. Silas began to heal. His back was a crosshatch of livid, purple scars that would never fade. But he could walk. He could work. Tully and Harris stayed away, letting the lesson sink in. Eleanor found herself watching the world with a strange, new clarity. The heat, the wind, the constant dust. It no longer felt like an assault. It just was. She was changing, her eastern softness burning away, leaving something harder, something more resilient. One morning, she was at the pump, hauling up a bucket of water. The dizziness that had plagued her on the stagecoach was long gone, but in its place was a new feeling, a thickness in her waist, and then a movement. It was not a flutter. It was a definite, insistent push, a tiny, living thing reminding her it was there. She dropped the bucket, the water splashing over her worn boots. She put her hand flat against her stomach. There it was again, the child. She had been so sure that the fear, the starvation, the constant stress, that the night with Silas, which had been a kind of violence in its own right, that all of it had ended the life she had lied about. It had not. It was alive. It had survived the preacher's curse and Tully's menace. It was a stubborn, impossible thing. She felt a rush of, not joy, not love, but a fierce, animal possession. This was hers. This was the only thing in the world that was hers. She had to tell Silas. He was the only other person on earth who knew her secret. She found him in the barn, his back to her. He was trying to mend a piece of tack, but his hands were clumsy. The fence post he had gripped, the barbed wire he had handled. His palms were raw, the cuts festering. "Silas," she said. He turned, his movement stiff. I needed to tell you." She did not know how. The child, my lie, the reason you did what you did." He flinched. He did not want to hear this. It was part of the shame. It is not gone," she said, the words rushing out. "I thought it was, but it is not. It is here. It is alive." She waited, for him to accuse her, for him to rage, for him to show any emotion at all. Silas looked at her. He saw her hand resting on her stomach. He saw the new, fierce light in her eyes, and he felt nothing. He was a dead man. He was a name in a ledger, a whipped animal. What was a child to him? It was a life he had no right to. It was a future he would never see. He said nothing. He just turned. His shoulders slumped, and picked up the broken piece of leather. His silence was a wall, and it shut her out completely. Eleanor stood there, her heart turning to lead. His silence was worse than the preacher's condemnation. She went back to the cabin, the aliveness inside her feeling, for the first time, like a terrible, lonely burden. That afternoon, Silas was sitting on the porch step, staring at his own useless hands. They were bleeding again, sluggishly. He could not hold a tool. He could not even make a fist. Eleanor watched him through the window. She saw his despair, his emptiness. She had offered him her living secret, and he had offered her nothing. She understood. He was not a man anymore. He was just the shame. She turned and went to her trunk, the one she had hauled across the country. She opened it. There, on top, folded in tissue, was her wedding dress, the one she was supposed to have worn for Asa Stewart. It was simple, cream-colored linen with a small lace collar. It was the symbol of her great, hopeful lie. She looked at the dress, the symbol of a false life. Then she looked out the window, at the broken man who was her true one. She took the dress from the trunk. She went to her sewing basket and took out the large steel shears. She did not hesitate. She put the shears to the linen and cut. The sound was loud in the small cabin, a tearing. She cut the skirt into long, clean strips. She cut the bodice. She cut away the lace and tossed it aside. She was not just cutting bandages. She was destroying her past. She was killing the woman who had arrived on that stagecoach. She walked out onto the porch. Silas did not look up. He just stared at his hands. Eleanor knelt in the dust in front of him. She took his right hand, gently. It was caked with dirt and dried blood. She took a strip of her wedding dress and dipped it in the water bucket. She began to clean his wounds. He looked up then, his eyes wide, uncomprehending. He saw the fine linen, the lace edge on one of the strips. This is... "It is just cloth," she said, her voice low. "And you are bleeding." She wrapped his hands, tenderly, firmly. The cream-colored linen became a stark white badge against his sun-blackened skin. She, the woman branded a harlot, was binding his wounds with the symbol of her lost purity. When she was done, she tied the last knot and sat back on her heels. They were bound, not by a lie, or by a child, or by a shared cabin, but by this sacrifice of the cloth. Maeve found them like that, sitting on the porch in the dying light. Silas, his hands wrapped like a mummy's. Eleanor, sitting near him, just watching the horizon. Maeve's heart twisted. She had her proof. She had the ledger. And now, she had to save him. She waited until Eleanor had gone inside to prepare the meager supper. She stood in front of Silas. "I was in town," she said, her voice quiet. "I saw the county ledger. Silas." He did not react. "I know what Harris is doing. I know he forged your name. I know he is setting you up to hang for all of it." This got a reaction. He looked up, his eyes sharp with a new, cold fear. Not fear of a whipping, fear of a rope. "What? What are you saying?" "I am saying he's laundering the whole territory, and you are the bucket. I am saying you are a dead man. Unless you do exactly as I say. I am going to ride to the federal post at Laramie. I am going to bring back a marshal who is not bought, but I cannot leave her here." He looked at the cabin, at Eleanor's shadow moving past the window. "Take her," Silas said, his voice a raw plea. It was the first thing he had asked for. "Maeve, please, take her away from here. Take her east. She is carrying. She don't belong in this dirt. It will swallow her." He was trying to do one good thing. He was trying to save her, the way he had failed to save Thomas, the way he had failed to save himself. Maeve looked at him, at this man she had loved and hated and mourned for 5 years. He was finally, truly terrified, not for himself, but for someone else. "And what about you?" she asked. "You want me to just leave you here, For Tully to find? For Harris to hand to a hangman? It does not matter. Just take her. No, Maeve said. What? I will not. I am not leaving you, and I am not running. She knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. Her eyes were fierce, the same fire he had seen in the graveyard, the fire he thought he had extinguished. Neither did I, she said, her voice rough. Neither did I belong in that Missouri dirt, neither did Thomas. But we stayed anyway, did not we? Or we were made to stay. There is no running. Silas, not anymore. There is only fighting. She was not just talking about him. She was talking about herself. She was absolving him. And she was damning him. All in one breath. She was refusing to let him be a martyr. Inside the cabin, Eleanor had heard it all. Her hand was on the doorframe, her knuckles white. She heard him offer her up. Take her away. She heard Maeve refuse. I am not leaving you. She saw the truth. She was the anchor. She was the reason Silas would not fight, and the reason Maeve was forced to. They were locked in a story that had begun long before her, a story of death and guilt. They were ready to die, here, on this ranch, for each other, for a ghost named Thomas. If she stayed, she was the stone that would drown them all. She backed away from the door. She looked at her small, packed trunk. She had to leave, not for herself, for them. She had to cut the rope. She began to move, quickly, silently. She grabbed the silver brush. She grabbed the small bag she had packed when she thought of fleeing the preacher. She would take nothing else. She would walk to the road. She would flag down the first wagon, the stagecoach, anything. She would disappear, and in doing so, she would set them both free. She put her hand on the cabin door. She smelled it first. Not wood smoke, not coffee, kerosene. She opened the door. The porch was on fire. A river of orange flames licked up the dry pine, already climbing the walls. Silas! She screamed, stumbling back. Maeve! Fire! Tully had come back. He had not forgotten the widow's barn. He had simply chosen a new target, Maeve and Silas, who had been locked in their standoff. Both scrambled to their feet. The cabin, the symbol of their prison, was now a funeral pyre. Eleanor jumped from the porch, landing hard in the dirt. She dropped her bag, her hands flying instantly to her belly, shielding it. Eleanor! Silas roared, running to her. He grabbed her, his bandaged hands rough. Are you hurt? No, Maeve! She ran to the back, to the rain barrel! Silas looked. The flames were already rounding the corner. The whole structure was crackling, the dry, old wood catching like kindling. He did not hesitate. He ran. He ran past Eleanor, past the wall of flame, and disappeared into the smoke that was pouring from the back of the cabin. Silas! Eleanor shrieked. He was gone. She heard a crash, the sound of glass breaking. The fire was roaring now. A living, hateful beast. The roof began to groan. And then, he was there. He burst from the smoke, his body low, dragging Maeve by the arm. She was not conscious. She was a dead weight. Silas was coughing, his hair singed, his face black with soot. He pulled her free, and the two of them collapsed in the yard, 10 feet from Eleanor. The three of them, together in the dirt. The cabin roof fell in, a spectacular, terrible explosion of sparks and cinders that lit the night sky. Everything was gone, the rope bed, the porcelain doll, the wedding dress bandages on the floor, all of it. Maeve coughed, a terrible, wet, racking sound. Her eyes fluttered open. Silas was on his hands and knees, trying to catch his breath. Eleanor was frozen, her hands still pressed to her stomach. Maeve coughed again, and this time she spat. Eleanor saw it in the flickering, hellish light of the fire. It was not just spittle. It was dark. It was blood. A beam must have struck her, or the smoke had ruined her lungs. Maeve looked at the burning wreck, at the ashes that were already settling on them. She looked at Silas, then at Eleanor. They won't stop, she choked, the words bubbling from her chest. Not until it is all ashes. The fire ate the night. It consumed the cabin, their shelter, their small, shared prison, and left behind a glowing, skeletal ruin that hissed and popped in the darkness. The ashes, light as whispers, drifted down, coating the three of them in a fine, gray powder. They were in the barn, the only structure left. Eleanor sat on a feed sack, her hands locked across her belly, her body trembling with a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. Silas stood by the open barn door, his bandaged hands clenched, his face black with soot. He was staring at the inferno, his pale eyes reflecting the orange light. The apathy that had been his shield for so long was gone, burned away. Maeve was the one who was dying. She was slumped against a stack of hay, her breath a shallow, wet rattle. She had coughed again, and the blood was no longer a pink froth. It was dark, thick. The beam that struck her, or the searing smoke, had torn something vital. "He will not stop," she rasped, the words bubbling. She spat. "Harris, Tully, they will not stop until it is all ashes." Silas turned from the fire. He looked at Maeve, at her gray face and bleeding lungs. He looked at Eleanor, frozen in shock. He walked to Maeve's side. You said there was a man," he said, his voice rough. "A marshal, in Laramie." "Thorne," Maeve breathed. "Elias Thorne. He is an honest man." "Then you must ride," Silas said. "I cannot," she whispered, a grimace of pain. I am done, Silas." "You are not," he said. He looked at Eleanor. Water. Eleanor, numb, moved to the stock tank, scooped water into a tin cup, and brought it. Silas held Maeve's head, forcing her to drink. "You will ride," he commanded, his voice not pleading but ordering. "You will ride, and you will bring him back. You are the only one who can." He was giving her a reason. He was giving her the one thing she could not refuse, a purpose. He, who she had accused of cowardice, was now forcing her to live. Maeve looked at him. She saw the boy from Missouri, the one who had run, and she saw the man who had just run into a burning building to save her. "The evidence," she choked. She fumbled inside her duster, pulling out the oilcloth pouch. She pushed it into his hands. "The ledger, the forgeries, my report, it is all there. You give it to him. Tell him, Thomas." "He will know." "No," Silas said, pushing the pouch back. "You will give it to him." He stood, walked to the stall, and began to saddle his own mare, the last valuable thing he had. He led the horse to her. "You will go, Eleanor and I. We will go to the root cellar. We will hide. We will wait. But you have to ride. Maeve, you have to finish this." Maeve stared at the horse, then at Silas. The fire was dying, and the first cold gray of dawn was touching the sky. She knew he was right. If she died here, in this barn, Harris would win. Her brother's name would never be cleared. Silas would hang. She used the horse to pull herself up. Every movement was agony. She swung into the saddle, her body screaming. She looked down at the two of them, the soot-covered ghosts in the barn. "Silas, ride," he said. Maeve turned the horse. She kicked it, hard. The mare, fresh and fast, leaped forward, carrying her east, a desperate, bleeding messenger, racing the sun. Silas and Eleanor were alone. "The cellar," he said, his voice flat. "All business. Now." He led her to the small, storm cellar door behind the ruins of the smokehouse. The fire had not touched it. He pulled it open, revealing a dark, earthen hole. "Go, there is water, some dried apples. Stay down, no matter what you hear." "And you?" she asked, her hand on the door. "I will be in the rocks," he said, pointing to the small ridge that overlooked the ranch and the road. "I will watch. Tully will be back to see his work. I need him to think. I need him to think the fire did its job. Silas, no, hide with me, please." "He will look for us," Silas said, his voice hard. "He needs to find nothing. Go, please, Eleanor." She looked at him. this stranger with a burned face and wrapped hands. She nodded. She descended into the darkness, and he closed the heavy door over her head, leaving her in a silence as complete as a grave. Maeve's ride was a blur of pain. She pushed the mare, and she pushed herself. The bleeding in her chest was a constant, hot pressure. She rode for 30 hours, stopping only to let the horse drink, her body held rigid in the saddle. Her mind focused on one name: Thorn. She arrived in Laramie not as a marshal, but as a wraith. She fell from the horse at the federal post and was carried inside. Elias Thorn was a bull of a man, with a face carved from granite and a deep mistrust of the world. He had known Maeve since she was a rookie, had always found her too passionate, too close to the line. He found her now in his infirmary, coughing into a bloody rag, her eyes burning with a feverish light. "Langley, what in God's name?" "Harris," she rasped, pushing the oilcloth pouch into his hand. "Wyoming Prosperity. Syndicate. It is a land laundering scheme. Murder. Slavery." Thorn's eyebrows shot up. "Slavery. That is a man, Silas Kane. They forced him into a servitude contract. They are using his name, forged, to steal the whole county. They murdered Asa Stewart. They burned us out. Last night, they tried to kill us all." Thorn opened the pouch. He was a man of paper. He read Maeve's report. He unfolded the ledger pages. He saw the signatures, the real one, on the servitude contract, and the forgeries on the land claims. He was slow, methodical. This is a damning case, Maeve, but it is built on forgeries. Harris will claim this Kane, this Silas, is the one who ran the scheme and then sold himself to Harris to escape the law. That is what he wants," Maeve said, gripping his arm. "That is the trap. You have to come back with me. Now. He is holding another auction tomorrow. It is how he washes the land. You have to catch him in the act." Thorn looked at her, at the blood on her lips. He looked at the evidence. He had seen this kind of rot before. "He has got Brody," Maeve whispered. "The sheriff. He has got the whole town, bought or scared." Thorn was silent for a full minute. He folded the papers. "I will need 5 men, good ones, men who do not talk." "Thorn, Elias, one more thing." "What?" "The man, Silas Kane. He is the center of it. But he is a victim. I know him." Thorn's gaze softened for just a second. "You will stay here. Maeve, you are dying on your feet." "No," she said, pushing herself off the cot. "I'm going back. I'm going to be there when that gavel falls. This is my case. Elias, I am seeing it through." Thorn looked at her, at the iron will holding her broken body together. He nodded once. 5 men. We ride in 1 hour." They rode back hard. Maeve, loaded with laudanum for the pain, was strapped into her saddle, a federal posse of 5 grim-faced deputies surrounding her. They were no longer a vengeful rabble. They were the law. They arrived on the ridge above the ranch in the dead of night. They found Silas in the rocks, just where he said he would be, an old rifle across his lap. He was gaunt, his eyes hollow. "Tully came," Silas said, his voice flat. He sifted the ashes. He laughed. He thinks we are dead." "He is wrong," Maeve said, her voice strained. She slid from her horse. Thorn and his men dismounted, their faces hard as they looked at the ruins. "You are Silas Kane," Thorn said. It was not a question. "I am," Silas said. Maeve explained the plan. "Harris will hold the auction at noon. He will sell the last of the properties he stole. He will use your name. He will think you are a ghost. We need you, Silas. We need you to walk into that town. We need you to face him." "He will hang me," Silas said, not with fear, but with certainty. You know I signed the contract, the servitude. That part is real. That is enough to hang me." "It is," Thorn agreed, his voice heavy. "You will be a witness. And then you will be a prisoner. I will not lie to you. Son, you will likely stand trial. Or, Maeve said, he will have Tully shoot me the moment I open my mouth. That is also likely, Thorne said. Silas looked at the ashes of his home. He looked at Maeve, who had ridden through death to get here. He looked at Eleanor's cellar door. He had been a coward in a graveyard in Missouri. He had been a coward in Kansas. He had been a coward in his own mind. Every day on this ranch. Not anymore. I will do it, Silas said. One last time. I will be there. Maeve nodded. Thorne and his men will be hidden. In the livery, on the rooftops. I will be on the street. When you make your move, we will back you. We will take them. All of them. Thorne and his men rode south, to circle into town before dawn. Maeve stayed, just for a moment, with Silas. Eleanor, hearing the voices, had emerged from the cellar. She saw the posse, saw Maeve, alive. She looked at Silas. She knew. She had heard his agreement. You are going, she said. I am, he said. Maeve left them. She had to get into position. The barn was silent, filled with the cold air before the dawn. Silas was shivering. He wore only the torn flannel. Eleanor looked at him. She turned and went to the small pile of salvaged goods. She pulled out his old canvas work coat. It was ripped at the shoulder, stained with soot. She sat on the hay bale, in the weak light of the lantern. She took out the small sewing kit she had grabbed from the cabin. She threaded a needle with thick, dark thread. Silas watched her. Her small, chapped hands moved with a steady, certain purpose. She did not bother with the small rips. She went to the great tear at the shoulder, the one from the fire. She began to stitch, her work small, tight, and strong. She was not mending. She was armoring. She finished the seam, knotted the thread, and bit it off with her teeth. She stood and held the coat out to him. You will be cold, she said. He took it. The mended seam was a hard ridge under his fingers. His bandaged hands were clumsy as he pushed his arms through. Eleanor, he started. She reached up and straightened the collar. Her fingers brushed his neck. You signed your name away? She whispered, her voice fierce. But you are going to get it back today. They need to see you, not the servant, not the ghost. She met his eyes. You will need your name, she said, even if it is only for one more day. He looked at her, at this woman who had survived the loss of everything. He nodded. Once. Go back to the cellar. Do not come out, no matter what. He turned and walked out of the barn, into the gray light. He was no longer Silas, the hired man. He was Silas Kane. Noon, the sun was a hammer. The town was gathered, the same beaten, silent crowd. Harris was on the saloon porch, clean and smiling. Tully and Jeb, his two dogs, stood near the auction block. Sheriff Brody was there, sweating, his badge a dull piece of tin. The auctioneer, the same man as before, was reading from his list. Next parcel, 600 acres, the North Range, formerly of the widow Hemlock, seized for debt, now property of the syndicate. What am I bid? Harris raised a finger. $50. $50 from Mr. Harris. A fine. 100. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the street. The crowd turned. Silas Kane was walking through the dust, his mended coat on his back, his bandaged hands at his sides. He walked with his limp, but it was not a limp of defeat. It was the gait of a man who had walked through fire. The crowd parted, whispering, staring. They had thought him dead. Harris's smile froze. Tully's hand dropped to his gun. Well, the auctioneer stammered. Silas, we had presumed. I am here to bid, Silas said. He did not stop until he was at the auction block. Harris stood up from his chair. With what, Kane? You have nothing. You are nothing. You signed your name away? That is right, Silas said. He turned, not to Harris, but to the crowd, to the Schmidts, to the widow Hemlock. He is right. I did. I signed away my name." He stepped up, onto the auction block, standing next to the nervous auctioneer. "So, I am here," Silas announced, his voice carrying in the dead, hot air. "To bid on myself, to buy my name back." "This is absurd," Harris snapped. "Tully, get him down from there." "My name is Silas Kane," Silas roared, and the town flinched. "And this man, Mr. Harris, is a liar, and a thief, and a murderer." Tully was moving, his gun coming out. "You are dead. He murdered Asa Stewart." Silas pointed at Harris. "He stole his land. He stole the Schmidt Ranch, using my name. He tried to burn the widow Hemlock out, and when I said no, he had me whipped." He tore open his coat, his shirt, the scars on his back, purple and red, were stark in the sunlight. The crowd gasped. "This is the law in this town," Silas cried. "This is the benevolence of Mr. Harris." "Shoot him!" Harris screamed. "Tully, shoot him now!" Tully raised his gun. "Federal marshals!" Maeve's voice, a raw-throated cry from the street. "Harris, you are under arrest!" She stepped out from the alley, her badge visible, her revolver level. Thorne's men appeared on the roofs, their rifles glinting. Chaos. Tully did not fire at Silas. He fired at Maeve, the source of the law. Harris, his face a mask of pure, reptilian hatred, drew his own pistol. He did not aim at Maeve. He aimed at Silas, the man who had undone him. Everything happened at once. Maeve fired. Her bullet struck Harris in the chest. He stumbled back, his eyes wide, his own gun discharging harmlessly into the sky. Tully fired at Maeve, Silas, unarmed, with his bandaged hands, did the only thing he could. He launched himself off the auction block, a living shield, shoving Maeve toward the ground. "2 shots! Crack, crack!" Silas grunted, his body seizing in midair. He collapsed onto Maeve, driving her into the dust. The posse opened fire. The street was full of smoke and screaming. Eleanor. She had not stayed in the cellar. She had followed. She had hidden in the alley, her heart in her mouth. She saw Silas step up. She heard his voice, his real voice. She saw him tear his shirt open, and she saw him fall. "Silas!" She ran. She did not think. She ran from the alley, into the middle of the gunfight, her hands outstretched. She threw herself onto his back, covering his body with her own, her hand flying to her belly. A shield for a shield. Maeve was trapped beneath them both. She was choking on dust, her ribs on fire. She saw Jeb, the rat-faced man, raising his rifle for a final shot at the pile of them. Maeve, her arm pinned under Silas's weight, twisted. She shoved her revolver against Silas's side and fired. Boom! Jeb spun and fell. It was over. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the sound of a woman weeping, and the groans of the wounded. Marshal Thorne stood over a cowering Sheriff Brody, kicking his gun away. "Amos, you are relieved." The posse was rounding up the survivors. Tully was on the ground, his legs shattered. Harris was dead on the saloon porch. Maeve pushed Silas's heavy, limp body off of her. She rolled him over. He was pale, his eyes closed. 2 dark, blooming circles were spreading on his mended coat. One in the shoulder, one low, in his gut. Eleanor was kneeling over him, her hands hovering, afraid to touch. "Silas! Oh, God! Silas, no! No!" Maeve put her hand on his neck. "He is alive," she rasped, coughing. "He is alive." The townsfolk stepped out from their hiding places. They saw Harris, dead. They saw Brody, in cuffs. They saw Silas Kane, bleeding out in the dust. The woman they had called a harlot weeping over him, and the bounty hunter who had saved them all guarding his body. The widow Hemlock stepped forward, her hand over her mouth. "Mr." Schmidt followed. They looked at the blood, at the mended coat, at the scars, and, for the first time, they understood what had been stolen from them. They began to see the bullet in the gut is a dirty thing. It does not kill clean. It tears, and it poisons. Silas Kane lay on a cot in the back of the town's small clinic, a space that smelled of carbolic acid, old blood, and dust. The doctor, a weary man named Elias, had spent 2 hours digging the lead from his abdomen, and another hour on the shattered bone in his shoulder. Eleanor sat on a bench outside the door. She had not moved. She had just listened to the sounds. Silas's low, terrible groans. The clink of metal in a glass bowl. The doctor's terse commands to his assistant. Marshal Thorne stood by the window, his hat in his hands, his face grim. Maeve was 2 rooms over, her own ribs taped tight, her lungs on fire. She had refused to lie down. She was writing her final report, her handwriting shaky, her page already stained with a single drop of blood she had tried to wipe away. The doctor finally emerged, wiping his hands on a rag that was already stiff. He looked at Eleanor. "He is alive," the doctor said, cutting off her question. "He is young, he is strong, but the ball in his gut, it tore the muscle. He will live, but he will not ride the way he did. He will not walk the way he did. The shoulder will heal stiff, the leg, the wound in his belly. It took the strength from his left side. He will need a crutch. For a long time, maybe forever." Eleanor closed her eyes, a single, hot tear tracing a clean path through the soot on her cheek. Alive. He was alive. The rest was just details. "Can I see him?" "He is asleep. Laudanum." "Let him be. You should rest. Miss, you look—" He saw her hand on her belly. "My God, you should be in a bed yourself." "I am fine," Eleanor said, her voice quiet, but made of iron. "I will wait." In the front office, Marshal Thorne was closing his ledger. Maeve walked in, her breathing shallow, her report in her hand. "It is done," she rasped, her voice a shadow of its former self. "Langley," Thorne said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. This is fine work, the finest I have seen. You broke a ring that went all the way to the territorial governor. There will be a commendation for this, a significant one. Your name will be—" "No," Thorne stopped. "What?" "No commendation," Maeve said, sliding the report onto his desk. "I do not want it. Maeve, it was not for the law." "Elias," she said, her voice low. "It was personal. It was a debt. A commendation would make it a lie. Just file the report. Close the case. That is all I want." "What about him?" Thorne asked, nodding toward the back room. "Kane. He is the victim. He is the witness. He is not the criminal." "The law might not see it that way. He signed a servitude contract. He was complicit, even if he was forced." "Then you make them see it," Maeve said, her eyes flashing with a spark of the old fire. "You use those ledgers. You show the forgeries. You show his name, signed by another man's hand, 12 times before he ever signed his own. You show the testimony from the widow Hemlock, from Schmidt. You show them the scars on his back, and you ask them what kind of complicit man gets whipped for saying no. You earn your pay. Marshal, you clear his name." Thorne looked at her, at the raw, bleeding passion that had nearly killed her. He slowly nodded. I will clear his name, and yours. Maeve, you need a doctor. In Cheyenne. Your lungs. My lungs are my own business," she said. She turned and walked out, leaning against the doorframe for a moment to catch her breath, before moving to the bench to sit, a few feet away from Eleanor. They sat in silence, 2 sentinels at the gate of a sleeping man. The law, it turned out, moved faster when a federal marshal was driving it, with Harris dead, and Tully and Sheriff Brody in chains. The syndicate's power evaporated overnight. The truth, once spoken aloud by Silas on that auction block, was confirmed by the ledgers. Marshal Thorne was true to his word. The investigation was brutal and swift. The forged contracts were all nullified. The servitude contract Silas had signed was voided, thrown out as a document of criminal conspiracy, secured through duress and threats. The land, the ranches that had been lawfully stolen, were returned. The widow Hemlock got her deed. The Schmidts, with money from the town's now shameful coffers, were able to rebuild, and the Kane Ranch, the small ashes and barn plot, was restored. The name Cain was cleared. The deed was returned to Silas, but Silas was in no condition to accept it. He lay in the clinic, fighting a fever that nearly claimed him. His new reality setting in. Marshall Thorne, seeing the truth of the situation, a wounded man, a pregnant woman, and a guardian angel with a bloody cough, drew up one final document. He brought it to Silas's bedside. Silas, his hands shaking, his skin the color of parchment, signed the paper. It granted full legal stewardship of the Cain Ranch and all its assets to Eleanor Taft. As his legal heir and acting head of household, it was a new lie, a true one, forged in law and justice. To replace the old lie forged in desperation? "You are a landowner, Miss," Thorne told Eleanor, handing her the paper. Eleanor looked at the deed. She looked at the signature, Silas Cain, his name, one back. She folded it and put it in her pocket. Winter came, hard and early. It buried the ashes of the cabin in a deep, cleansing white. The world was scrubbed clean, and the three of them were trapped. They lived in the barn. It was a time of fragile, aching peace. The townsfolk, led by a guilt-ridden widow Hemlock, had helped them patch the barn, making it weathertight. They had brought food, sacks of flour, potatoes, salted pork. It was an apology, spoken in firewood and blankets. The barn was one large, cold room, smelling of hay and animals. They divided it with horse blankets. Silas on a cot in one corner, Eleanor, her body now heavy with the child. In another, Maeve, by the door, a restless sentry. Her bedroll, her only home. The healing was slow. Silas's body was a prison. The doctor had been right. When the fever broke and he finally tried to stand, his left leg would not hold him. The torn muscle in his abdomen had stolen his strength. Mr. Schmidt, the German farmer, came one day. He said nothing. He just handed Silas a piece of carved cottonwood, a crutch, sanded smooth, with a leather pad for the arm. Silas's shame was a palpable thing. He, a cowboy, a man of the plains, was now a cripple. He would sit for hours, his bad leg stretched out, his bandaged hands, healed but scarred, tracing the grain of the wood. His silence was a wall of grief. Maeve's lungs were a constant, rasping presence in the night. The smoke had scarred her. She could not laugh, could not shout. Any sudden exertion sent her into a fit of deep, painful coughing that left her breathless. She, the hunter, was now grounded. She was a bird with a broken wing. Eleanor was the center. She was the one who was whole. Her pregnancy, once her shame, was now her armor. She was the reason they were a they. She cooked the food. She changed Silas's bandages when he would let her. She boiled herbs and honey for Maeve's cough, forcing her to drink it. "You sound like a dying crow," Eleanor would say, her voice devoid of pity, full of purpose. "And you look like a frightened whale." Maeve would rasp back, but she would drink the tea. They were a family of broken things, held together by the quiet, stubborn will of a woman who had refused to run. They worked. Silas, from his seat, mended tack, his hands slow and clumsy, but methodical. Maeve, her strength returning in bursts, would clear the snow, tend the horses, her movements economical, saving her breath. Eleanor kept the fire, kneaded the bread, and read to them at night from her Pilgrim's Progress, her voice the only sound in the barn as the wind howled outside. They did not speak of the fire. They did not speak of Missouri. They did not speak of the night in the hay. They were three people sitting in a long, dark, quiet room, waiting for the spring. Spring came not as a thaw, but as a flood. The snow melted, revealing the black, soaked bones of the cabin. The earth was mud, and with the first scent of green. Eleanor's time came. It began at dusk, a simple, sharp pain that made her gasp and drop the ladle. Silas, sitting at the rough-hewn table, went white. "Now?" "Not yet," she breathed. "But soon." By midnight, it was no longer soon. It was a storm, as violent as the one she had wept through. Silas, useless, panicked, grabbed his crutch and paced the barn. his uneven thud on the dirt floor a counter-rhythm to Eleanor's groans. "Silas!" Maeve's voice cut through the dark. She was kneeling by Eleanor's side. "You, go to the porch. You are making the ground shake. I should." "You should go," Maeve commanded. Her voice was strained, but the old authority was back. This was a job. This was a task. She knew how to do this. She had hunted. She had tracked. She had field-dressed a buck. This was just life instead of death. Silas hobbled out into the cold night air, his hands gripping the crutch so hard his knuckles ached. He stood under the stars, a useless man, listening to the sounds of a life he had no part in creating. Inside, there was only the lamplight, and the pain, and Maeve's voice. "Breathe, Eleanor," Maeve coached, her hand gripping Eleanor's. You know how to do this. You are not a runner. You are a stayer. You showed me how to be brave. Now, show me again. Breathe!" Eleanor screamed. A raw, animal sound, and Maeve was there. Her hands, which had taken life, were now the first to welcome it. It was hours later. The sky was the color of a pale pearl. Silas was slumped on the porch, his head against the post, when the barn door creaked open. Maeve was standing there, her shirt soaked, her hair plastered to her head. She was exhausted, but her face was soft, open, in a way Silas had never seen. She held a small, bundled cloth in her arms. You have a son," Maeve whispered, her voice rough with emotion and fatigue. Silas pulled himself up on his crutch. He looked at the small, red, wrinkled face. This child, the one he had turned away from, the one who had survived the fire and the ice. He reached out a finger. From his scarred, rebuilt hand, he touched the baby's cheek. The tiny mouth rooted, searching, a feeling he could not name, heavier and more terrifying than any bullet, settled in his chest. They rebuilt the cabin. It was the first thing they did. The widow Hemlock's sons, now in possession of their land, came to help. Mr. Schmidt, who knew how to build, directed. Silas, on his crutch, could not lift. He could not climb. So he sat, and he measured. He measured the cuts. He drew the plans in the dirt. He was the mind. Maeve and the Schmidt boys were the muscle. Eleanor, the baby, they named him Thomas, strapped to her back, was the will. She hammered the nails, her arms sure and steady. They built it with 2 rooms, small but separate, for a time. The 3 of them lived in a peace that was no longer fragile. It was scarred, but it was strong. They worked the small field. Silas, leaning on his crutch, showed Eleanor how to string a fence wire. Maeve, her lungs too weak for a long chase, found she had a talent for breaking the wild colts that ran on the plains. They bought 2 with the money from the syndicate's seized assets, which Marshal Thorne had routed to them. They were a strange, broken, beautiful family. The ranch, once a place of shame and servitude, was now a home. One afternoon in late summer, Silas saw Maeve by the corral. She was not working. She was packing her bedroll. Her horse, the one she had broken, was saddled. He felt the old, cold fear of Kansas, the fear of abandonment. Later, Eleanor found her by the creek, washing her face. "You are leaving," Eleanor said. It was not a question. "My work is done," Maeve said, drying her face. "The law is settled. You do not need me." That is not true. Silas is walking. The baby is healthy. The cabin is built. I am a hunter. Eleanor. And there is nothing left to hunt here. "Stay," Eleanor said. Maeve turned. "Why? For him? For Silas? That is over. That is a different life." "No," Eleanor said. She adjusted Thomas on her hip. "Stay for him. He will need to learn how to be strong, not just staying strong, like I can teach him, but fighting strong, like you." Maeve looked at the child. He had Silas's pale blue eyes. "And, yes, for Silas," Eleanor said, her voice dropping. "He needs you. I am his his ground, I am his home. But you are his sky. Maeve, you are the one who proves he is not chained. He needs us both. This family, it needs all three of its legs. Or it falls over. Maeve looked at this woman, who had once been a pale, Eastern girl. She said nothing. She just unsaddled her horse. That night, the three of them sat on the new porch. The baby was asleep inside. The sky was vast, a deep, purple-black, punched through with 1 billion cold stars. The silence was comfortable, worn, like old leather. Silas finally broke it. He was looking north, at the star that did not move. I used to look for you. Maeve, he said, his voice quiet. After Kansas, after you left, I hated you for it, but I looked for you. Every town I went to, every time I saw a marshal, I looked for your face. I thought if I could just see you, I would, I do not know, be whole again. He looked at her. Her profile was hard in the starlight. You were always my North Star. Maeve, the one true thing. Even when it was angry, even when it hurt, you were the one thing that pointed the way. I am glad I found you. Maeve's throat felt thick. She could not answer him. She looked away, at Eleanor. Eleanor was just watching the dark, her hands resting in her lap, her stillness a rebuke to all of Maeve's restless motion. You are the one with the courage, Maeve whispered, her voice a low rasp. I just know how to use a gun. I know how to be angry. That is easy. It is just fire. But you are like the earth. You know how to stay. You know how to take the fire and the flood and the ice and just wait. And then in the spring, you build, you make things grow. I envy you that. I envy your courage. Eleanor said nothing. She just reached out, in the dark, and her hand found Maeve's, and she squeezed it. A few days later, a quiet afternoon, the heat had broken. Silas was sitting on the porch step, leaning against the post, his eyes closed. He had been working with Maeve, rebuilding the burnt corral, and he was tired. His crutch lay on the porch boards beside him. Eleanor came out of the cabin, holding a cup of water. She saw him there, asleep, his face peaceful for the first time she could remember. She saw the crutch, the symbol of his wound, the thing he leaned on. Quietly, she bent down. She picked up the crutch. She carried it, her steps silent, and leaned it against the cabin wall, just out of his immediate reach. He stirred, his eyes opening. He saw her. He looked at the empty space beside him. He saw the crutch, 5 feet away. He looked at her, confused. You do not need to carry everything alone, she said softly. Silas looked at the crutch, that piece of wood that had been his partner for almost a year. He looked at the healing land. He looked at the cabin door, where his son was sleeping. He looked at Maeve, who was in the corral, her back to them, working the horse in a steady, patient circle. He turned his head and looked at Eleanor. A slow, healing smile touched his lips. No, he said, but I needed someone to carry it for... A gust of wind, the first breath of autumn, blew through the wild grass, making it whisper. The land was still harsh, the sky was still too big, but for once, in this small, broken place, no one ran. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West Campfire. We would love to hear your thoughts, and where in the world you are listening from, so you can connect with other listeners. Please subscribe to our channel, and feel free to share your comments below.